Ladies and Habibis, we are going to introduction to you rising star of South Asia. He is very well educated. He knows Islam and Christianity very well. He done what they said he can't. He is Doctor.
Alhamdulillah.
Wait a minute, what are you doing, Zakir? You come out, it's not you. Habibi, take him out. Sorry, there was some problem. He's Adam Sikher.
Hello everyone, this is your favorite Murtid. Salamul Masih, peace of Christ be with each and every one of you. I hope you guys are having fun. And hello and welcome everyone. Your favorite Murtid is live with you once again. Today is Sunday, and I hope a lot of people have already gone through the church and all the rest of the things. And if you have not gone to the church, that's fair enough. At least you are enjoying a weekend. So, welcome. Today, I am not the key host of this video. As you know, I have scheduled this for a long time. You guys are already waiting for this wonderful, wonderful stream and the wonderful guest that we are going to have today. So, before I invite my guest, please do like and share the video so that everyone could appreciate and acknowledge our wonderful guest today. This guest is Robert Spencer, as you have seen already, and he has written many of the videos, many of books, and a lot of research. If you want to have links of his books, it's in the description, and my moderators will keep on sharing the links of his books. His YouTube channel is JihadWatchVideos. I'm going to share it in the live chat as well, so my moderators will keep on sending that to everyone as well constantly and giving you all the latest and greatest information about this his beautiful work that he's doing. With that being said, we have already 750 people live. Push the video so that a lot of people would be able to see it, because this is not my standard day. As you know, a lot of people know that because of the Sharia tube, we are not getting the notification out. So it's your job to share it with everyone. Please do it. It will not be an open live stream as I do regularly. It's more of a podcast style live stream. And then in the later part, we are going to translate it as well and have some discussion with Sahil, who's going to join us later. And we're going to have some discussion. So now, without any delay, I'm going to invite our guest today. Please give him a warm welcome with your flowers and clappings virtually. Robert Spencer. Sir, how are you today? How was your weekend so far?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Adam? It's an honor to be on your channel, and thank you for inviting me.
Sir, thank you so very much. Welcome to Pakistan, India region. I hope you have been here earlier as well in a couple of other channels, I think.
Yeah, I've been on the Jaipur Dialogues many times, and I'm good friends with those men, and some other shows as well, Sangam Talks, and so on. And so I'm very happy always to speak to people in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan once again.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. Our warm welcome from this subcontinent region of Asia. We all love your work. A lot of people have been asking me to invite you, and finally you are here. And it's my honor that you have given us your time, especially on a Sunday. I know Sundays are usually busy with family and all, and yes, you are here. So thank you so very much to begin with for being here. A lot of people have welcomed you in the live chat with super chats as well. I'm going to read them a little later, but right now they are all welcoming you. They are loving that you're here. So thank you so very much once again for being here, sir.
Thank you.
Your new book, it is a wow book. Like, let me tell you myself. Like, I started reading it a few days ago at around 9 p.m. my time, and And then I was like, I'll read it for a couple of hours. And then my wife came in and she was like, go to sleep. And I was like, no, no, you sleep, you sleep. And at around like midnight one, I kind of fell asleep while reading it. It's just so addictive. A lot of questions that I have been searching for, this book gives answer with references, with quotations and everything. It is just crazy. Like, how much time did you take to like figure out all of these things to put it in this book?
Well, this book, we're talking about Muhammad, right? Muhammad, a critical biography.
Absolutely, sir.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure. But this book, it didn't take long to write, about 3 months maybe. But this is the fruit of 25 years or 30 years of exploration and research. I've written two others about Muhammad before. The Truth About Muhammad, which is kind of a straight telling of the story that Islamic tradition presents, and then Did Muhammad Exist, about the historical problems with the story. And then this puts those together and adds more to explain how there are contradictions and inconsistencies and strange anomalies right in the Islamic traditions themselves about Muhammad. So that the story that a lot of people have, that especially in the West, where Islamic apologists like Omid Safi and Tariq Ramadan and others have written biographies of Muhammad, they distill the material in the Sirah literature and the Hadith into a coherent whole. And many people are familiar with that story. But I show in this book that that coherent whole is not really in the tradition itself, and you have to ignore a great deal of contradictory material in order to put it together.
Absolutely, absolutely. Beautiful, beautifully stated. So I'm gonna give you an open mic to begin with before, I have a lot of questions, but I don't want to start with questions. Uh, the mic is yours. Please, however you may like to start, please start. And when you would like me to ask you something, let me know. The mic is yours. The show is yours. You are the chief guest, sir.
Well, thank you, my friend. I suppose the main thing that is the first thing that people need to know is that when people say that Muhammad said something or did something, that that's only from sources that come from 200 years later that we know that. The accounts from the time that he actually lived or the immediate 50 years after that, when the people who knew him lived, they don't exist. And so when people confidently say Muhammad said this or did this, it's the first thing to bear in mind is that we're talking about 200-year later traditions about what Muhammad said and did. And so a lot of people, they think, well, this doesn't make any sense because you yourself, Spencer, have said Muhammad said this and did this. And now you're saying that we can't really know anything about what he said and did. And what I am saying actually is that we have to know both. We have to know what the Islamic traditions say that Muhammad said and did, because Muslims today and Muslims throughout history have been acting upon those traditions. They believe Muhammad is a prophet. They believe he really said those things and did those things. And so they imitate him because the Quran says he's the excellent example. But at the same time, we also have to explore whether those traditions have any historical value. Because ultimately, if Muslims are going to be staking their lives on this and then taking the lives of other people because of this, they need to be on firm ground. And if they discover that they are following the example of somebody who is more of a myth and legend than historical fact, that would revolutionize the entire Islamic world. Now, I know a lot of Muslims are never going to even consider this evidence, but that does not free us as non-Muslims from the obligation to know it, because in the first place, it's important to know the truth wherever it leads. And second, in dealing with the challenge of Islam, we have to have a comprehensive, complete, full understanding of what we're dealing with. So It's very important on the one hand to know the contents of the Islamic teaching, and they're set out here in this book about Muhammad. But it's also important to know that these are not historical accounts, and that there is much that's taken for granted in Islamic tradition that's contradicted by other traditions, including even his name, Muhammad, the name of the angel who appeared to him, Gabriel, many other things. The time of his career as a prophet, whether it was 10 years in Mecca, 10 years in Medina, or 13, one and the other, or some other period of time, when he was born. All these things are controverted not by critics of Islam, but in Islamic tradition themselves. And that shows that nobody really knows anything for sure about this man, who may never have lived at all. And those things that are so valued by Muslims when they think of his example are just as much myth and legend as the rest of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very beautifully summarized, I would say. Like when you were talking about these things at this moment, and my mind was working backward on your book, and I was like, yes, like I could not have presented the summary much better than you already did. One of the most important question right now, before we go further, is in your book you stated that the Quran literature, to some extent, not all, was compiled earlier than the Hadith literature. So, how do you think this comprise in your finding of whether Muhammad was a real person or not?
Well, the thing about the Quran literature is that, you find a lot of Islamic apologists, and they like to point to the earliest manuscripts. And there was recently a manuscript of the Quran. Recently, I mean several years ago, maybe 10 years ago now. A manuscript of the Quran was discovered that was dated to between 560 and 640. Now, Islamic apologists were saying, see, you see, this shows that Islam is very ancient, that the Quran is really what we say it is, because here's a copy of the Quran from within the lifetime of Muhammad. This could have been Muhammad's own Quran. But the problem is, if you're dating it from 560, that's before Muhammad is supposed to have been born. If that's even a possibility, then what you're dealing with is not the Quran at all. What is more likely is that you're dealing with a source book that was taken and used to comprise part of the Quran. Because we know when we look at the Quran, if you read my book, The Critical Quran, that the Quran has a lot of antecedents. It has a lot of sources. There's a lot of material in it that is taken from Jewish sources, from Christian sources, from Zoroastrian sources, and others. So you have, for example, the Houris of Paradise. That's from Zoroastrianism. You have the sleepers in the cave in Surah 18. That's from Christianity, the seven sleepers of Ephesus. You have, if anybody kills an innocent person, it's as if he's killed the whole world, from Surah 5. And that's from the Talmud. And so you have all these sources. And you also have, according to the scholar Christoph Luxemburg and also Gunther Luhling, that you have material that shows traces. If you change the pointing, you strip out the Arabic pointing of the letters, because a lot of, as people know, I'm sure, but just to make sure that people understand, there are 22 letters in the Arabic alphabet, and 16 have at least one that looks just like it in the alphabet.
Yeah.
And all you do to distinguish one letter from another is change the dots, the points that are above or below the letter. And so you have a B or a T, and they look the same, except they have different points, or various F and a Q, and they look the same, but you change the points to make one or the other. And so you strip out the Arabic pointing, because the earliest Quranic manuscripts don't have any Arabic pointing anyway. And you read it in Aramaic with Aramaic pointing, and suddenly it starts to make sense of material that in the Arabic is very obscure. So the point being that when you find these ancient Quran manuscripts, they could not be Quran. They might not be Quran at all. They might be whatever was used to make up the Quran, some earlier text that comes from Christianity or from some other tradition. And so it's also interesting to note, Adam, that in the 9th century, when the Hadith collections appear, and you start to have all these stories about the Quran and about Muhammad, and all the Asbab an-Nuzul literature about the circumstances of the revelation and all the rest of it, that it's interesting to note that there are traces of controversy and disagreement in that literature about the ordering of the chapters in the Quran and the contents of some of those chapters, of material that was lost, of even controversies over the Qibla, things like that. They're supposed to have been settled 200 years before. And
Yes.
yet it's not just that they're talking about how they were old controversies 200 years before. There are disagreeing traditions even in the 9th century literature, and traces of indications that it's a live issue even at that time. So while, yes, we have Quran from before Muhammad's traditions start to be written, at the same time, even the Quran doesn't seem to be entirely settled, even by the 9th century, contrary to what most people assume.
No, you're absolutely right. We cannot have a full Quran. And even the 9th century Quran is a compilation of at least 7 different Qurans, where different portions of different Qurans were taken to make a full 90 to 94% of the Quran itself, of the current one. And even though the very important thing that you said over here for all the Western audience who doesn't know Arabic, I'm going to show it. So what Robert Spencer earlier was saying about is this. Like, for example, this in Arabic can be a ta, can be a ba, can be a ya, can be a noon. So where you place the dots, it can change the letter from ba, ta, ya, or noon, and so on and so forth. So the whole idea is that without these dots, you don't know what a letter can be. And if you have 2 of them, for example, in Arabic, there will be a lot of places where you will have 2 of them together. They can make so many meanings as well. So anybody who has known Arabic a little bit or has studied Arabic, like me in school, as Pakistan, we have to read and study Arabic till the 8th grade back in those days. At least I did it. So it's very easy for you to see the problem what Robert Spencer is describing as compared to the Westerners who works in the ABCD rhyme. So it's very easy over here for us. So going back to our subject, sir, very beautifully described all of these things, and especially the one that the literature, the Quranic literature, have a lot of contradictions, especially in the Sira and Asbabul Nazul for sure. Asbabul Nazul is one of the most controversial issue because so many asbab, like if you read the Qurtubi Asbabul Nazul of certain verses, you will see 8 to 14 different narratives of a single verse, like because of this it happened, or because of that it happened, or because of this it happened, or because of that, and so on and so forth, and nobody seems to be agreeing why this verse came or revealed upon Muhammad by Allah. So in essence, any single school of thought can pick up any single verdict and accept it and acknowledge it, and that becomes their school of thought and their understanding, and that creates a huge problem in essence. It just, like, the more fighting, like, in your book as well, you stated it in a very different way, which I have never stated it, that the more information that you have about something kind of creates a creeping kind of an effect, that what is the validity of all of these informations. Like, do you understand what I'm saying here? Like, what is
I,
the validity?
I don't think I'm quite following you now. The more information you have, can you explain more,
The more
please?
information, like you have like 10 different contradictory information, but all of these informations are very, very defined. They
Yes.
have they have full body text in it. So how can 8 be true?
Yeah, exactly. Well, see, the thing is, it's very clear when you read Qurtubi or you read the other Asbab an-Nuzul that they have different explanations of the Quran passages because you have different factions of Muslims who are fabricating different explanations to suit themselves or the party that they want to support, the position that they want to support in the Islamic community. So what you have are explanations that are written after the fact in order to explain the verse. It's not really that the incident happened and the verse comes out of it. The verse was there, and a lot of them made no sense at all. And so different people made up stories to explain what the Quran passage meant. And a lot of those stories are completely contradictory because one group in one place would make up one story and another group in another place would make up another story. And often the differences were based on their different political positions within on or theological positions on controverted issues. But also it could just be completely trivial based on a reading a different placement of the points as you were explaining. It's a very nice explanation that you put up there, and what that means for people, just to make sure this is clear. For example, when you have the beginning of the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, right at the beginning, this is the book. There is no doubt in it. If you change the points, then you can make it say, this is the book. There is no oil in it.
Yep.
And it's the same. It would be written exactly the same way, except for the points. La raiba fihi or la zaita fihi, and that's just a matter of
Placing the
changing
dots.
where the points are.
Exactly, the dots are so yeah. By the way, this is another issue. If you look at the Tibri, Qurtubi, and Ibn Kasir, and even if you look at all of the early scholars, Zalika actually does not means this. Zalika means that. Every other location in the Quran where the word Zalika is mentioned, it is that, because that is that. And Haza means this. And Quran actually uses the word Haza, Hazal Quran multiple times in the Quran as well. I have a live stream on this one as well. What is that book? Because Tibri says and Qurtubi says and Ibn Kathir says that some of the scholars, early scholars, and the companions of Muhammad said, here Zalika means Torah wa Zabur wa Injil, because Quran is not even a book at this time, because Surah Baqarah was revealed when Muhammad migrated, and Quran has never become a book at this moment. The books that they have was Torah, Zabur, and Injil, which is Torah, Psalms, and Gospels. So even the scholars do not agree. But when we see after 14th century, you would see a consensus among the Muslim Ummah that this means here is this is the book which is the Quran, and which doesn't make sense. Like, how did Muslim scholars come to a conclusion after the 14th century, whereas all the early scholars are showing a very different, distinctive. Like, did they receive another revelation from Allah that this is now Quran rather than the early
Yeah.
scholars?
And not only that, but there are also a lot of words in the Quran that nobody knows what they mean at all. And there is a conventional explanation for their meaning that is based on the Quran itself. But why is the Quran using this word that nobody ever heard before that? And it seems most likely that these are words that come over from Aramaic or from some other language. And so they're pointed in the Arabic text as the conventional Arabic text of the Quran, but it's just a nonsense word. And so they made up some explanation for it that fits with the passage. But it doesn't go beyond the Quran itself. Nobody ever used the word outside of the Quran. And so the whole of the theology of Islam, really, and of the Quran in particular, is a kind of house of cards building upon itself. It doesn't have a referent outside itself.
I couldn't agree with you more, because harufe muqatti'at that you are talking about right now, like alif lam mim, yasin, alif lam mim swad, ha mim ain swad kaf. So all of these words are, if you look at the hadith, the tafsir literature, um, they actually have meanings. For example, about yasin, Tibri actually writes 6 pages on that. And in this, he's referring a lot of scholars and the companions of Muhammad and tabi'ins of Muhammad, the companions of the companions, saying, Qasam Allah, this is the name of the Allah. And some is saying Yasin means insan. Some is saying, like, so on and so forth. So he's giving you, it is the people of Habasha saying this, people of Persia saying this, and so nobody knows, in fact, what does that means. And suddenly, after Ibn Kasir, a consensus you will see start to develop after 13th 14th century,
Yeah.
that these are rufe muqattiyat, means they are words which has to be read separately. It doesn't mean anything. So what you are telling me right now is that even though the hadith literature has been established 300 years after the death of Muhammad, Quran literature has been established supposedly after 300 years of the Muhammad, yet what does Quran actually says and means took another 300 350 years to be established.
That's about right. The Quran, see, you know what the funniest thing is people, and I'm sure that you've encountered this, probably every time I've ever quoted the Quran in the presence of a Muslim, they've said, you're quoting it out of context. Yeah. When you read, I don't know if I've ever quoted the Quran in context, ever. I probably wouldn't even be able to. But the thing is, if you read the Quran, there isn't any context. You know, Hatun, I'm sure you know Hatun is.
Yes, I do.
She is. We're going through the Quran from my book, The Critical Quran, every week, and we're only still in Surah Al-Baqarah, but so we've got a long way to go. But we're going through it anyway. And every time the subject changes, I've been pointing it out that Surah Al-Baqarah, of course, it's the longest chapter, but it constantly changes topic and shifts to something else that has nothing to do with what was discussed before. And so you're talking about context. There isn't any context. It's just obviously people are so used to thinking of it as a unit. But it's quite obvious when you read it closely and start to think about, well, how does that follow from this? Why is he talking about this now after that? That it's a lot of different things that were pasted together. That somebody took a collection of various texts, most of them about various rules, about laws, but some about other things, and put them together in this one chapter. So it's now the longest chapter in the Quran, but it doesn't have any context. The Quran is notably bereft of context. It veers from subject to subject. It's not ordered in any fashion at all, which only clearly indicates it's a book written by committee and taken from here to there, taken from all these different sources and put together. Not one person. For one person to write that and to write it in that way, he would already have to be crazy.
I couldn't agree with you more. By the way, you used a very nice word. Father Zachariah Butros actually used the correct word. He said, Masturul Sukaran Katabul Quran. A complete drunk wrote the Quran. Masturul Sakran.
It's
So,
a lot like that. That's I can't argue with that, you know. the people are, you know, the thing is, as you know, growing up in Pakistan, you're taught that this is a book you have to approach with extreme reverence and not
yes,
with a critical mind at all, and you would never dare to question it.
chapter 5, verse number 101.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just, and it's not just 5101, but if you're growing up there, you know, everything in the society is militating against you questioning it. You can see that you would lose everything if you're known to question it and to be critical about it. So people don't think about it. It just is, and they accept it. If they stop for 5 minutes to look at it critically and to ask, why is it put together like this? Why does it go from here to there? Why does it speak about these things in such a chaotic manner? So you have the Exodus 8 or 9 times told with different details, but never told once with all the details in a single place. Why do you have pieces of the Christian narratives and the Jewish narratives, but not the whole thing? why does it sound as if it's telling the stories that everybody's already heard before? And if they stopped and thought about that for a second, nobody would be a Muslim anymore.
Very well stated fact. Very well stated fact. And I think you on Hatun Tash channel, I think you took a approach which is different than mine. If I would have taken this approach of going through the Quran, I would have gone through it by the revelation order of revelation. Even though there is a lot of issues over there, whether this order is correct or incorrect, whether chapter number 96 is the first chapter, or chapter number 73 is the first chapter. Even the first chapter has an issue. Some people say 73 is the first chapter. Even Bukhari has two different contradictory hadiths, whether chapter number 73 is the first chapter, 74, sorry, is the first chapter, or chapter number 96 is the first chapter. But still, you know, when you read it through the Asbabul Nazul, even with the conflicting views, you will have some kind of a little notion of flow, even though chapter number 73 verse number 20 and chapter number 73 verse number 10 and 11 is supposedly in Medina, whereas it is the third chapter. And like it's crazy when you even read it from the Asbabul Nazul, yet kind of gives you a little bit, even though there is no context as well, but gives you some kind of a flow to an extent for a topic. But reading it in the current order, there's no topic. Yes, sorry, sir. Please.
There's no doubt that it does that. You're absolutely right. And when I was writing this, the Critical Quran, I thought about initially. Actually, I had planned to put it in that order, in the order of the Asbab al-Nuzul, the order in which the chapters were revealed according to Islamic tradition. But the more I got into the project, I decided not to do that and to go with the order as it is in the standard Quran. For one thing, that was because it would be, I knew that people would find it confusing if they wanted to find a chapter and it wasn't in the order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but it was 114, 2, 5, and like that. And so that was one thing. But the other thing is that we have to remember that the Asbab al-Nuzul comes from the 9th century, and it's trying to make sense of this text that is just a mass of chaotic, contradictory material. And so I decided ultimately not to do it, but to put it in the standard order, because you're right. It does make for a little bit of a coherent narrative, or a more coherent narrative than the one that's in the Quran as it stands. But that order was imposed from without at a great distance, and is it's as much of, I think it's as much of an attempt to make sense of the Quran as the Asbab al-Nuzul stories are, and the contradictory stories that we were discussing before, that they were created after the fact, that there really isn't any Mecca or Medina distinction in the literature. It's just contradictory material because it comes from different sources and is all put together in this book. And so now they have to try to make sense of it and fashion a theology. And so this is the result, is this idea that there's the Meccan surahs and the Medinan surahs, and the Meccan ones are early and the Medinan ones are late, and the Medinan ones supersede the Meccan ones. All that's a 200 years later effort to try to make sense of this book that makes no sense.
Very well stated. Very well stated. So this takes us to the second part of our discussion on this book. Now that we know that why Quran literature is early, and this Hadith, Tafsir, and all of these Asbabul Nuzul literature is much later, now let's go back to the origin, Muhammad himself. In your book, you are writing in page number 17 and 18 about Muawiyah. Muawiyah, the fifth caliph, basically, if you look at it. He's the fifth caliph of Islam. After Ali, Muawiyah became the caliph, right?
Yes.
You are showing in the book, page number 70, Muawiyah somehow was in Golgotha, and the creed of Muawiyah in page 18, and Muawiyah is all talking about Jerusalem and everything else, and Muawiyah has nothing to do with all of these things. What is happening here?
Well, this is the mystery. What you're talking about is a Maronite chronicler And the Maronite chronicler in the year 661, which is when he became the caliph, Muawiyah, he says many Arabs gathered at Jerusalem and made Muawiyah king. And he went up and sat down on Golgotha and prayed there. He went to Gethsemane and went down to the tomb of the Blessed Mary and prayed in it. Now, what on earth is that? If you think about, this is supposed to be the caliph of the Muslims. And this is an account from the time that he lived. This is a contemporary account. So it's inconceivable that it would have been fabricated, because people would have said, no, none of that happened. So why are they going to Jerusalem? Why don't they go to Mecca? Why did they make him king in Jerusalem instead of Mecca? Why did he go to Golgotha, the place of the crucifixion of Christ that the Quran denies, if he was a pious Muslim? Obviously, he wasn't. Obviously, he had no idea that they did not kill or crucify him, but it appeared so unto them, as the Quran says. He really thought they did crucify him, or he wouldn't have gone to Golgotha. And if he went to Golgotha and prayed when he became king, then obviously he doesn't know about any of these things that Islam teaches. And if he doesn't know them, you have two choices. He's either a heretic, an apostate, which nobody accuses him of in Islamic history, or these things were about, these aspects of Islam were not invented yet in 661. And so the whole Islamic narrative fails on historical grounds right there.
Perfect. Very well said. So Muawiyah, number one, he went to Golgotha. Number two, if you go to your book, the very next page in 18, you have Creed of Muawiyah on the page 18. And it's a beautiful creed, but it's all about Christ somehow.
Yes.
So in July of the same year, you may read it better than me, so please.
In July of the same year, I'm looking for what you're referring to.
Page 18, the first line.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is the same chronicler. And so this is the same guy in 661. We don't know his name, but he was a Maronite Christian. And he's
thrown on Damascus. So it's not just he went to Golgotha alone. He was thrown on Damascus. It's like 1,200, 1,400, 1,500 kilometers up north.
Yeah, he placed his throne in Damascus and refused to go to the seat of Muhammad. Now, what on earth does that mean? If he's supposed to be the caliph of the Muslims, why does he refuse to go to the seat of Muhammad? Where is the seat of Muhammad? Why does he go to Damascus? Why does he go to Jerusalem? Why does he go to Golgotha? None of that makes any sense whatsoever, unless you, as I just explained, you have Islam not invented yet. And so he is a monotheist, and he has some kind of a connection to Christianity, but he is not by any stretch of the imagination any kind of Muslim. And and it's very important, we also note here that when it says he refused to go to the seat of Muhammad, that the seat of Muhammad is not, we can't just assume that that means that Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, had been living and was, and he had the caliphate based out of Mecca. There is no reason to assume that, because there's absolutely no contemporary record of it. There's actually no contemporary record of anybody like the prophet of Islam in the 7th century. So when this was written, we don't have any idea who this Muhammad is they're talking about or where his seat was. But we do have the caliph of all the Muslims distancing himself from Muhammad and ruling from Damascus, which just does not make any sense according to the standard Islamic narrative.
Perfect, right on spot. One more thing, his coins, they have a cross.
Yes, and that's something that a lot of people have noted, because the coins, of course, are tangible evidence that you can see, that you can track them down. I have pictures of them, and did Muhammad exist? And the coins say, in the name of Allah, Bismillah, Bismillah, Rabbi, in the name of Allah, my Lord, Rabbi Allah, my Lord is Allah, and Bismillah al-Malik, in the name of Allah the King, but no coins that were minted at the time of Muawiyah say Muhammad Rasulullah. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. None of them say that. Some of them say Muhammad, but they have crosses on them. And so you have to, once again, you have to think, why would a ruler who is ruling within 30 years of the death of Muhammad put crosses next to the name of Muhammad on his coins? Why would he do that if he had read in the Quran that they did not kill or crucify him? And if he had heard that Muhammad had said, as the Hadith claim, that Jesus will come back and break the cross at the end of the world. If Jesus is going to come break the cross, you're going to put crosses on the coins? It makes no sense at all from an Islamic perspective. The only explanation is that the Muhammad means something else other than the Prophet of Islam. Because, like I say, we have no record of the Prophet of Islam at this time. And we know that it can be a title meaning the praised one. And that the crosses on the coins, maybe the praised one is the one who was on the cross, Jesus himself. But the existence of the cross on the coins once again collapses the entire house of cards of Islam as history. That people say Muhammad lived from 570 to 632 and he lived in Mecca and he taught these things. If we had the whole Hadith and the whole Quran by 661, when Muawiyah becomes caliph, why is he putting the cross on his coins? He knows the cross is wrong. And he knows that Muhammad taught that Jesus is going to break the cross. So it wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. That if he had done that and Islam had existed at that time, then he would have been branded as a renegade, as a heretic. He would have been beheaded right there. He would have been removed as caliph. Well, not only was he not removed as caliph, but his son becomes the caliph. He makes it a hereditary monarchy. And it's the Umayyad monarchy, the dynasty, until 750 when the Abbasids defeat them. So,
we have so basically the essence is that Muslim historians picked up a person whose name felt like Arabic name, and placed it in the history of Islam.
yeah, it's a title. It's a title that could be applied to anyone. If I say Adam Seeker is a wonderful person, a solid and honest, careful and meticulous scholar of Islam, then you're Muhammad. You're the praised one. Now, the praised one par excellence, the greatest praised one is God himself. And then a Christian would say that the incarnate God, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is also the praised one, and consequently Muhammad. And this may be why you have Muhammad with the cross on the coins of Muawiyah.
So then it takes me to a different subject now. In your book, you are talking about a record in 796 from Malik ibn Anas stating that I have never seen people reading Musaf al-Quran in the mosques.
Yeah.
And that creates a bigger problem. So you're telling me before 796, the mosque never had Quranic Musafs and they were not reading it. Then if they don't have that, then how can you offer prayer in an Islamic way? Because prayer, like the offering a prayer in an Islamic way, require people to read the Musaf of Quran, and it just goes like, it just blasted my mind when I started reading this. This is crazy.
Yeah.
And how can this be? Like, please enlighten us.
Well, that's one of my favorite stories out of all of Islamic tradition, that it actually is referring to an earlier period, because he's saying that we did not read the Quran in the mosques until the time of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, which is toward the end of the 7th century and the beginning of the 8th. Now, that's actually quite early. I don't think that he was reading Quran that early, actually, but that's the tradition. Even that tradition taken at face value explodes Islam yet again. We've already destroyed Islam twice during this stream, and now here we're destroying it the third time. Because if this, think about this, why would an old man say that? If you have an old man at the time of Hajjaj, and he's recalling that at the time of Hajjaj, who is right around the beginning of the 8th century, right around the year 700, he was the governor of Iraq under Abdul Malik, the caliph. And Abdul Malik was 685 to 715. So you have Hajjaj ibn Yusuf in early 700s, and he says, okay, now we're going to read this Quran in the mosques. And this old man says, we never did this before. Wait a minute. I thought that Uthman collected the Quran in 653 and distributed it to all the provinces of the Muslims, and that all the mosques had the Quran after that. And so why is this guy saying, no, it wasn't until 50 years later? Now, see, a lot of these things, when I quote these traditions, a lot of Islamic apologists will say, well, you're quoting weak hadith, you're quoting late traditions, and you're putting them up against earlier ones and saying we should believe the late ones.
Okay, no, wait here. Before you continue, I know you have a point. I know you have a point, but I'm gonna wait you here for that point. I'm gonna wait you here for that one. For that point, let's go back to your book. In page number 44, 45, you are talking about a person Su'aybat, if I'm pronouncing the name right. And you are talking about that the early Islamic sources of the stories of Islam had no chain of narrations.
Yes.
And then people started to question that where did you get this information? So then you actually write in the next passage where you showed that they added people to the story so that it will sound legit. Yes. And then in the next page, you are telling us a story about a storyteller who stood among the people gathering in the mosque and etc. 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 And page number 46, the guy is talking about, hey, I am humble. I am Ahmad ibn Hanbal. I have never said that. You are associating it to me. I have never said that. And he said, are you the only Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal? Are you the only Yahya ibn Mu'in? There are 7 Yahya ibn Mu'in that I know, and there are like 8 Imam ibn Ahmad ibn Hanbal that I know. How, like, so, like, this is so crazy when I'm reading this, that, like, obviously these names are so very common name, from the Abdullah, Abdul Muttalib, Malik, and all of these, they're so common.
Yes.
There could be like hundreds of them. Now tell us, how do we correlate with chain of narration and the Muslim argument that these stories are much later and those stories are earlier? Because none of the stories are earlier. They are created to be shown as earlier, but none of them are.
Well, as you pointed out, the earliest hadiths have no chain of
narration.
None of them have it. And so the earliest ones, there's no answering the question, where did you get this? Nobody knows. But the chain of narration was invented in order to give the air of authenticity to various stories. And so, especially where there was disagreement, one group would say, look at this isnad, the chain of narration, and look, everybody in it is an eminent, worthy person. And so our version of what Muhammad said is right, because it goes back through this isnad chain right to the Prophet. And so then the other group that had the contradictory story would make up a better chain of narration and attach it to their story. Or they would, and then once every story started to have the chain of narration attached to it, then they would even change those. So you have different versions of the story where one version has a better chain of narration. And so the idea of early and late, the idea of reliable versus unreliable, it's completely meaningless in the Islamic context, because there was rampant forgery, as we know from Bukhari himself. Bukhari collected 600,000 stories of Muhammad. 600,000.
And he wrote only 7,400.
And yeah, What did he do with the others? They were forgeries. They were worthless. He threw them out. And he decided the 7,400 were authentic based on the Isnad. And yet the Isnad is just as much capable of being forged and fabricated and faked as the story itself. And so Bukhari was either fooled on a massive scale or was trying to fool us. And all the other hadith collectors, same thing. They're trying to fool us or they are fooled themselves. And the early and late, we can't tell. We just have this massive literature. The reliable and unreliable, we can't tell. We just have this huge mass of contradictory stories. Now, the thing about it is, you have to then ask, and this brings me back to the point I was making, that when the Islamic apologists say you're quoting late stories, why would anybody make that up? If Uthman really collected the Quran and distributed it and codified it so that there was one single Quran and sent it around everywhere, why did anybody make up a story 100 years later or 150 years later or however long later saying we still didn't have the Quran in the mosques for 50 years after Uthman? If Uthman made the Quran, then nobody would make up a story like that. There'd be no point. But if Uthman did not make up the Quran, it's easy to understand why people would say, oh, Uthman made up the Quran. Because when you come into the mosques and you say, we have the Quran, this is the word of Allah given through the angel Gabriel to Muhammad, then you have the old men standing up and saying, wait a minute, I never heard of this before. What are you talking about? Where did this come from? And so then you say, oh, Uthman, he did this 50 years ago, but it's just never reached this town before. And you explain it. And in those days, they can't go online and check. They can't even read the newspaper. They can't call their friends. There's no way to tell. And so over time, it becomes accepted. But that's the only way that it makes any sense that these stories would exist about the late Quran and about how late it was introduced into the worship and all the contradictions. If you accept the standard story, you can't explain that. There's just no way.
So this leads me to my third section, the mosques. You're talking about the mosques in your book on page number 28 and 29. The earliest mosque of Malik ibn Anas, that where he was reading and talking to these people about this. In 641, the Cairo mosque, which is supposedly built in 641, actually it's pointing to Petra. Whereas Quran chapter number 2, verse number 144, it says, turn your faces towards Makkah, so there could be no mosque that is facing towards Petra. Then you're talking about in the next page, page number 29, the mosques of 622 to 708, supposedly there are two mosques, but they are facing something between Petra and Mecca, but not at Mecca, not at Petra.
Well, wait a
So
minute.
we have an issue.
Wait a minute, my friend. Hold on.
I'm
You
holding
said
on, sir.
2144 said, turn your faces toward Mecca. It does not say that. It says, we have seen the turning of your face to heaven, and now indeed we will make you turn toward a Qibla that is dear to you. So turn your face toward the sacred mosque.
Yes, sacred mosque. You're right. Sorry, my bad. Islamic narrative. I'm talking about the Islamic narrative. My bad. I am so sorry.
Well, you're right. You're right. Everybody in the world thinks, oh, the sacred mosque, that's in Mecca. Except there's no indication that that's necessarily the sacred mosque that was meant. And as you noted, as Dan Gibson has discovered and proven with, the compass and everything, that so many early mosques don't point to Mecca and point to Petra, which is interesting in light of the fact that what we were reading before about Muawiyah setting his throne in Damascus. Well, that's a lot closer to Petra than it is to Mecca.
Absolutely. And Robert Spencer is talking about the video called The Sacred City, and there is a book, The Sacred City, as well. If anybody is interested, do watch it. Very beautifully described. I loved it. Very beautiful. I actually watched it after I left Islam, and I was so glad that I left Islam. So these mosques and the pointing of these mosques are really crazy and solid evidence which if you connected with the coins of Muawiyah having a cross and saying Bismillahi Rabbil Alameen or the Bismillahi Rabbil Rabb, and not mentioning the full creed of Islam, Bismillahir Rahman Rahim, which is the creed of Islam, it says Bismillahir Rahman Rahim. There is none of that mention, or the mention of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. It's so crazy that, like if you are talking about a so-called maybe Christian or some Christian heretics or whatever, I'm not going to say Christian or Christian heretic, I'm not going to pin a point because I do not have the data for that. They would say in the name of God. They would say that. Like this is basically very easy to say in the name of God, who is the Rabbul Arbab, and Revelation also says Rabbul Arbab, Christ is Rabbul Arbab, Rabbul Rabb, Rabbul, and so on and so forth. So the word Rabb is in Arabic Bible, it's so much there, you can't even deny the fact. So how did this be that some of the Christian heretics and movement somehow become part of Islamic movement? And then there was a guy called Mehmet.
Well,
In page number 13 and 14, Siyobot writes about in 660, 670, that there was an Ishmaelite called Mehmet, who's a merchant. And a lot of people talks about this, that, oh, we have Mehmet, not Muhammad, but Mehmet.
Yes.
And he like, there you go, the evidence of Muhammad. And it's in 660, 670. So he's like, there we go, the evidence of Muhammad. So, and then he's an Israelite as well. So he's from the line of Israel. But then we go to page number 15 of yours, and things goes very bad. So would you like to explain these two pages to our viewers? Because you know, you have seen, I'm not going into the Islamic literature of the life of Muhammad, which is your real essence of the book. I'm sticking to the prefaces, because these are the hard points. These are the rocks of this whole book.
Okay. Well, yes, as you noted, Sebeos was an Armenian bishop, a Christian bishop in the 660s, and he wrote, there was an Ishmaelite called Machmet, a merchant. He presented himself to them as though at God's command, as a preacher, as the way of truth, and taught them to know the God of Abraham, for he was very well informed and very well acquainted with the story of Moses. So that sounds, a lot of Islamic apologists will say, see, you're saying that we have no record. That's very clearly Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. But there is a lot of difficulty with this because in the first place, there is, let's see.
Page number 15, his true
Yes.
tweet.
I'm just trying to see where I should start to explain this. What we have is, oh, here we go. That Sebeos also says this: Machmet forbade them to eat the flesh of any dead animal, to drink wine, to lie, or to fornicate. He added, God has promised this land to Abraham and his posterity after him forever. He acted according to his promise while he loved Israel. Now you are sons of Abraham, and God fulfills in you the promise made to Abraham and his posterity. Only love the God of Abraham. Go and take possession of your country, which God gave to your father Abraham, and none will be able to resist you in the struggle, for God is with you. So this Machmet was a Zionist, and the Quran does have have Moses rather saying to the children of Israel, go into the Holy Land that Allah has ordained for you. And so it does seem to match what Sebeos says about Machmet. However, the emphasis, I'm trying to see what point.
However, the Islam is emphasizing on Mecca for the Muslim center, not Israel. So it's kind of flips the whole switch, like the 180 degrees.
It's been a year since I looked at this, so thank you. You'll have to pardon me for not remembering it all. But yes, the the Sebeos Machmet is very obviously a spokesman for the Jews, and he's saying, now go and take your land. Whereas, of course, the Quran, although it does say go and take the land, is extremely hostile to the Jews. And
Islam says, I'm sorry, Islam says go and take the land. He's talking to Bani Israel, the children of Israel, to Moses, and to Muslims, he's talking about Makkah and Medina, not
yeah, because
to that land. Yeah,
Musa in the Quran is a prophet of Islam, and he teaches Islam. And the inheritors of the promise that is given to him are the Muslims, not the Jews, who are renegades and enemies of Allah.
exactly. And if you read in page number 15, the Sebios also says, then they all gathered together from Havilah unto shore, and before Egypt, Genesis 25:18, they came out of the desert of Paran, divided into 12 tribes according to the lineage of their etc. They divided among their tribes the 12,000 Israelites, 1,000 per tribe, guide them into the land of the Israel. They set out the camp by camp in order to their etc. 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 I'm going to skip that. There are the tribes of Ishmael. All the remnants of the people of the children of Israel come to join them. Join who? The tribes of Israel, and then constitute a mighty army. Then they sent an ambassador to Emperor the Greeks, saying, God has given us this land as heritage to our fathers Abraham and his property. So all of this, Eusebio is talking about this Mehmet, which if it is Muhammad, then he is on a wrong location. That this
Yeah,
Mehmet is trying to get his people back into Israel, the land that the God has given them as children of Israel or as children of Abraham. And he's talking about the 12 tribes of Israel, according to the Bible, and he's getting them back there. And the Muhammad of Islam has never said anything like this whatsoever. So
yeah. He said,
either it is a different Muhammad, or if it is the same Muhammad, then Islam changed the narrative of that Muhammad to a different
he
location.
sounds like Moses in the Old Testament, because he's saying
Absolutely.
they sent an embassy to the emperor of the Greeks, saying God has given this land as a heritage to our father Abraham. The Muslims, the in the standard account, when the Arabs conquered the territories of the Byzantine Empire, the Roman Empire in the Middle East, they didn't say God gave this to our father Abraham and we're reclaiming it. The in the Islamic tradition, Muhammad sends letters to the emperor of the Greeks, that is the Roman emperor Heraclius, and calls him to Islam. He doesn't say anything about that this land belongs to us because it was given by God to our father Abraham. That's all Judaism. It's not Islam. And yet this is what Sebios is saying in the 660s. So Islamic apologists who want to say that this is confirmation that Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, was known as such at that time, it's completely contradicted by the substance of what he's saying, that this is all the inheritance of the children of Israel that they are reclaiming now. That there's no indication of that in the Islamic literature whatsoever.
Absolutely. So that goes the Muhammad of the early times. So now let's I'm just loving it. I loved your book, man. I have no idea how much I loved your book. So the final discussion, and I know I'm very short on time, so I'm trying to do it as fast as possible. And there's a super chat on that as well by JP. And this is my last and final point for today. And then we'll take questions from the audience if they have any. Sir, Saint John of Damascus of the 7th century, you need to go to your book, page number 32, and you'll have the biography of the Messenger of Allah, the heading, page number 32. So he's talking about Saint John of Damascus of 7th century, writes that Quran compilation of 140 books, not a single book. There is a lot more to that you have written there, and it is crazy, insane. So what would you like to say about John of Damascus? Because he states a very few beautiful things, but then again, his statements goes against the Muhammad statements.
Yeah,
What is your point, sir?
John of Damascus seems to be dealing with something that is getting closer to Islam, but it's not the Islam that we know it, even still. And he does say that the followers of Mahmed call us associates because they say we introduce to God an associate by saying Christ is the Son of God and God. Now, there are traces of that in the Quran as it stands, that a mushrik is somebody who associates partners with Allah and so on. And so he notes that they loathe the cross, they hate the cross, unlike Muawiyah just 50 years before. So there is a great deal of development of Islam between Muawiyah and John of Damascus. But he also seems to think, as your commenter said, I don't know if it's 140 different, but it's certainly different texts. He does not seem to know the Quran as one book. He writes about it as if it's a lot of different books. He says that Muhammad composed many frivolous tales, to each of which he assigned a name, like the text of the woman, in which he clearly prescribes the taking of 4 wives and 1,000 concubines. Now, of course, woman is the 4th chapter of the Quran as it stands, and it does say you can take 4 wives. It does say you can take concubines or sex slaves, although it does not specify that you can only take 1,000. Theoretically, you could have more than that. He says Muhammad also mentions the text of the table, the text of the cow, and these are, of course, chapters of the Quran nowadays, but he acts as if they're separate books. And also the text of the camel of God, about which he says there was a camel from God. Well, there is a camel of God in the Quran, in Surah 7 and 11 and 91, but there's not a separate chapter called the camel of God. And so we don't know what John was talking about. Although every time the camel of God is mentioned in the Quran, it acts as if there's more to the story. Like it's just reminding you of this familiar story, which we don't have. It doesn't seem to have made it into the final Quran. And so it's clear that this once again contradicts the idea that Uthman collected the Quran, because 50 or 60 years later, after Uthman, when John of Damascus is writing all this, the Quran is still not settled.
Absolutely. And in your page number 30, it's talking about John of Damascus writing about a false prophet, obviously, according to Christianity. But then you're talking, then you gave all the rest of the information here with everything. But once again, he goes into an immense detail about the Quran teaching. That is in page number 31 to be precise. And he gives certain aspects of different chapters of it. But then again, when you go in further detail, you see all of these problems and other problems that you have described in page number 33, 34, 35, and which was beautifully described. I will not take into detail on that. And I would rather like people to get your book and read it, because this is an absolutely fantastic, interesting book to read with all the data and information. And it is crazy, like how much of a effort, like you said, 30 years, 30 years.
I first read the Quran in 1982 or 3, I think. And yeah, it would have to have been then. And started to study it, started to read the Hadith and Sirah literature after that, and then was consulting about it in the 90s with various groups. Was asked by one of them to write a book about Islam right after 9/11, and of course now written many other books. So very familiar with the story of Muhammad. And of course, for many years, it took for granted that this was just a standard historical account, because that's what you're taught in the West in colleges. But, well, it isn't. And you can see
Western colleges. That brings me to another thing.
Yes.
Which I wanted to skip, but now you brought in the West.
Yes.
In the West, people are very easily say, hey, there was no Jesus, there was no Moses, there was no Isaac or Abraham or anything. But like when it comes to denying Muhammad, even though that Muhammad has almost zero historical evidence or archaeological evidence, whereas we have a lot of evidence about David and Jesus and a lot of other biblical prophets, whereas Muhammad has zero archaeological evidence, zero historical evidence, yet somehow you will not find any secular in the West saying, oh, there was no Muhammad. Why is that?
Well, you know, everybody has been taught in the West now for 20 years that anything remotely critical about Islam is Islamophobia, and you have to avoid it. And it's ridiculous, because there's a biblical scholar, Bart Ehrman, And I think he wrote a book. I'm not entirely sure of this, but I think he wrote a book called Did Jesus Exist? I have no problem with him looking into that. I doubt that I would agree with his conclusions. I think there's a lot of solid historical evidence for the existence of Jesus and the reliability of the Gospels. We can discuss that another time. But nobody said, hey, you must hate Christians. You must hate Christianity. You must be a Christianophobe. Nobody criticized him. As a matter of fact, in the West, he was celebrated. It was courageous. He was groundbreaking, like Reza Aslan, actually, who is a Muslim, who wrote a book. I think actually he had it written for him because he's kind of an imbecile. But he wrote a book called Zealot about how Jesus was not really claiming to be the Messiah or was the Son of God or anything. He was just a zealot, a political rebel against the Romans. And it was a ridiculous book, but he was widely celebrated and praised. And then I wrote Did Muhammad Exist? And now the Muhammad, a Critical Biography. And people say, Spencer, you know, he hates Islam. He hates Muslims so much. He even questions if Muhammad existed. I think, wait a minute. Why does that? In the first place, I don't hate anybody. But in the second place, why is it that you're courageous and heroic if you question Christianity? But if you question Islam, suddenly you're hate-filled and bigoted and racist. But this is the craziness that prevails in the West today. It's a kind of suicidal insanity.
Very well said. Very well said. But everything that you said is right on the spot. But at the same time, who created this notion? And why did the Westerners accepted this notion? That's point number one. And point number two, before I miss that, Bart Ehrman in his own book actually stated one of the most, I'm quoting it, one of the most certain fact of the history is that Jesus was crucified on the order of Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate. Even though Bart Ehrman, when he looked into the historical Jesus, even though he does not believe Jesus to be Lord God Almighty, incarnated in as a human being, God man, uh, at least he acknowledges the historical account of Jesus to be there and was crucified. So his as a full-fledged atheist, his historical evidence points to presence of Jesus over there and being crucified according to what the Bible is saying on the orders of Pontius Prefect Pilate. So that is like he's right on spot. And I'm like, from an atheist acknowledging that Jesus is there, that's what you want, right? You don't want him to accept the theology, Christian theology. You don't want that. Like Christian theology is a Christian theology for the Christians, right? But when we talk about Muhammad, you will not find anything whatsoever. So who created this notion in the West that if you will even try to figure out whether Muhammad was real or not, you are Islamophobe? How did this come into being?
There are groups in the West, like the Council on American Islamic Relations in the United States and others, and they know how to play the media and the people who are in charge. They know how to manipulate them. They're very good at it. And they know that the big trauma, the big nightmare, the big thing that frightens people in the West is racism. If you don't like somebody because his skin color is wrong or different from yours, or you don't like somebody because he's of a different race, this is the worst evil in the history of the world. And there is no other evil that matches it. Now, I think that in itself is silly, because there are people of every race that are terrible and people of every race that are good. And if you have certain people and certain groups that say, oh no, you can't say anything critical about these groups because that just means you don't like their race. Well, anyway, racism is a silly thing, but also anti-racism that claims that every criticism of a designated group is racist. That's also silly. But the thing is that they've used that weapon very skillfully. So they say most Muslims are brown people, whatever that means. I mean, everybody's a brown person, really, when you look at it. But most Muslims are brown people. So the white people, they hate brown people, you see. And so if you criticize Islam, you're racist, and people believed it. And so I find people calling me a white supremacist, and then other people say I'm not even white, and I think the whole thing is stupid to think about things in those kinds of terms. But this is the prevailing way that they're thought about in America and in Europe today. And the Muslim groups have been very, very successful in saying, you criticize Islam, it's because you just hate brown people and you're racist. And so they've shut it down and stigmatized any kind of criticism of Islam, not only just questioning the historicity of Muhammad, but even opposing jihad violence. If you note correctly that it comes from the Quran and Islam, then it's because you hate brown people and you're a racist.
Absolutely. By the way, I'm brown and I'm Christian. So if you say anything against me, you are racist as well now. So how can, like, it's silly, like skin
Christians
color
are,
cannot do that, you know. My ideology and my theology and my skin color is altogether two different things.
yes, but also you're a Christian, so Christians are not part of the victim group.
A
Christians
Christian cannot be a victim group at all? Why?
well, actually, Christians are the most victimized of all religious groups
Thank you
and
so very much.
are persecuted around the world, particularly right now in Africa, but also in Pakistan and elsewhere, as you well know. But the standard media narrative in the West is that Christians are white oppressors, Muslims are brown victims. If a story fits that narrative, then it gets printed. If it does not fit that narrative, it gets ignored.
Yeah, it seemed like Trump being attempted assassination 3 times and nobody knows about 3 times. They only know about 1 time. So yeah, it's just crazy. You know, the media is so woke right now. So I'm not going to talk about politics. Let's go back. So let's have some super chats. The questions. EasyPay Global. He's our constant supporter and he has the app EasyPay Global. Guys, if you want to transfer money from anywhere to anywhere in the world, you have this international account that you will make through this EasyPay Global and you can transfer the money in split seconds. He said, so basically what Robert Spencer is saying, that there was no Muhammad actually, and all Quran was all made up, which later in the 8th or the 9th century. This is so shocking and most devious deceit in human history. What an eye opener. Thank you, Robert Spencer. So that was the
Yeah,
question.
that's basically it. Some of it comes from a little earlier, but yes, that's basically the story. And if you doubt it, you can read here. And if you think that I am wrong anywhere, then write me an email to director@jihadwatch.org and we'll discuss it.
Awesome. Voyager said, Robert, you are banned from entering the UK. Is there a time limit or is it for lifetime?
I don't know. I haven't tried to get back. We did appeal at the beginning when the ban was first put there in 2013 because the ban was ridiculous. A lot of people like to say, oh, he's so hateful. He was banned from Britain. I was not banned for being hateful. I was banned because I said Islam is violent. I have the letter on my website, jihadwatch.org. You can find it. It says, you said Islam has a doctrine of warfare against unbelievers. And we think you'll say that again if you come to Britain, so you're not allowed in. Now, everybody knows Islam has a doctrine of warfare against unbelievers. That's like saying, you have said water is wet, and we think you'll say it again in London, so you're not allowed to come in. I don't know. We lost the appeal, and that was around 2015. They said it would be for 3 years. So 3 years should have been up in 2016, but I have not tried to get in. I don't think I ever will. It might be for a lifetime. It might not be. I don't know. But I think Britain is in very deep trouble and is surrendering to the jihadis. And the ban that I received was just one aspect of that.
I couldn't agree with you more, sir. Voyager also said, Robert, tell us something about your upcoming book, Atheism, History, and Myth.
Yeah, I wrote this because I am an Orthodox Christian. And right after the October 7th attacks by Hamas, where they killed 1,200 Israelis, I was talking with a couple of Orthodox Christians whom I had been friendly with and had respected, and was shocked that not only did they not understand that the war against Israel is a classic jihad, but they also thought that the Jews run the media, the Jews control the world, the Jews are conspiring to destroy non-Jewish civilization. they believed all these things. I didn't know anybody believed these things anymore. And so I thought that it was necessary to investigate and to see, well, do the Jews really control the world? Do they control the media? Did they deserve October 7th? Why is there so much hatred of Jews? And so I trace it to Christianity, which has largely rejected it, but obviously there are a lot of Christians who hate Jews today. Islam, which hates Jews far more than people realize, and also National Socialism and International Socialism. And so in the book, I discuss how anti-Semitism comes from those sources. And then I go through some of the main charges that the Talmud is like the Quran, only worse. People say it's full of all these terrible things about hating and killing non-Jews. And I show that that's not actually true, and show that it's not actually true that the Holocaust was fake, and various other things that people say about the Jews. I thought it was necessary to do this because of all the things that we're hearing after October 7th. This led to a mass murder in the past, and I think it could well again. So I was trying to head that off.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so very much. We have two guests who would like to say hi before you leave. I know you have 9 more minutes left according to your time. Matthew Solomon from Pakistan, and he is also a pastor and a debater with Muslims. He has done many debates with Islamic scholars. Pastor Matthew Solomon, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. And hello, Dr. Spencer. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Likewise.
I'm an admirer of yours. I have read your book on jihad and crusades. And there was another book which I read, but I forgot the title of that book. I have watched several of your videos, and I was wondering if you can speak Turkish.
Turkish? No, I can't speak Turkish. My family
Okay.
was Greek. They were Greek Christians in the Ottoman Empire, and they were exiled for refusing to convert to Islam. If they had converted to Islam, they would still be there, and I wouldn't
Right.
be here. It's interesting
Right.
that a lot of the Turks now are discovering, they're taking those DNA tests and discovering, oh my goodness, I'm Greek, I'm Armenian, whatever.
Right.
They're
Right.
finding out that they are the children of people who converted under pressure to Islam.
Mhm.
My grandparents refused to convert, and they left. They were exiled instead.
Right, right. So I heard you saying that your parents were from Turkey. So I was wondering if you could speak any Turkish words, because I taught myself to speak Turkish. I have a great interest in Turkish. I mean, the history of Turkey, because it has a lot of history of Christianity, especially when it comes to the apostles as well as the early church. So
Well,
I
that's
am
all.
really,
That's Greek material, not Turkish. So you should learn Greek
really,
next.
yeah. I'm referring to Cappadocia, which is mentioned twice in the New Testament.
Yeah, but the New
It's in
Testament, of
Turkey,
course, it's written in Greek, of course, but it's
of
also
course.
dealing with the Greek environment. The whole of what is now Turkey was land of the Greeks. That's where my
Right,
family is from, and it was
right.
the Turks invaded and conquered it later. So you want to
Mm-hmm.
understand the history of that region. It's Greek,
Right,
not
right,
Turkish.
right, right. Well, thank you, sir. And I'll be keeping you in my prayers. And
Thank you very
although
much.
I'm speaking to you for the first time, I would humbly ask you to keep me in your prayers as well. I'm a Christian apologist from Pakistan. My name is
Hey,
Matthew Suleiman. And by the Lord's grace and mercy, I'm the first Pakistani Christian who started debating Muslim scholars in Pakistan
oh my
uh,
goodness.
On
Well,
stage, by the way, on
on
stage.
I
stage.
certainly will be. I don't have to tell you. You have to be very careful, and I will be
Yeah.
praying for you.
I have seen that so many times, so closely. I was poisoned in 2020, and
I was poisoned in
but
2017.
yeah, I am aware of that.
Oh, where? Oh, wow. Both of you had the taste of poison. Awesome.
Yeah,
Before you guys
yeah,
continue, I know Dr. Robert Spencer has a very little time. Dr.
yeah.
Robert Spencer, I have to invite one more guest, my dear brother, my elder brother from another mother from India, ex-Muslim Sahil. Let's welcome him. He would like to say a few words as well. Brother Sahil, welcome to our stream. God bless you. Welcome, Robert Spencer and Sahil.
Thank you so much, Adam, for the warm welcome. And Hi, Robert.
Hello, good to meet you.
Yeah, nice to hear you today on our channel.
Thank you.
So,
Hi, Matthew. How are you?
okay.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, I'm
Thank
seeing
All
you.
right.
Matthew also in the stream.
Yeah,
So
I'm good. Thank you.
before we close, I think there's nothing more here except that a lot of people said thank you to Robert. Robert, thank you
Thank you.
so very much for being here. Um, and I know I asked for 90 minutes. I'm trying to stick to my time because I will have to invite you again on multiple other subjects. So I don't want to take extra time of yours. Thank you so very much for
Thank
joining us
you.
here, giving this information to everyone. Guys, the link is in the description of my video if you want to buy this book, but you should buy this book. We only discussed the first 4 chapters of this book today. The rest is marvelous as well. All of the history of Islam from Siratun Nabawi, from Tafsir, and everything is in there. The marriage of Muhammad, the marriages of Muhammad, the fights of Muhammad, the hijrah of Muhammad, and all of these things, where these sources come from, they are in the book. Obviously in 90 minutes I cannot go all through that. I have read 170 pages so far. The book has around 300 pages. I have not even gone through that. The rest I skimmed, and I thought maybe we'll have some more discussion on that, but we didn't had enough time, so I couldn't do that. But thank you so very much for everything, Robert, that you've done,
Thank
and the
you.
people will going to read it, and I will definitely call you again if you don't mind.
Thank you. That'd be great. I look forward to it.
So with that being said, I'm going to end the stream on my English channel and my Facebook, and then I will go in Urdu and Hindi to go through the session that we did with Robert Spencer. Sir, let me just end it in
Uh,
English.
may I say something?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Mr. Spencer, Dr. Spencer, if by any chance you ever plan on coming to the UAE, please do let me know.
The
I'll
UAE.
be, yes, sir.
Thank you. I would love to go, but I'm not even sure I'd be allowed in.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean that's the reason that I said if by any chance you
Yeah.
ever plan on coming to the UAE, I'll be pleased to host you here to set up meetings for you to speak at and to show you around.
I'd be
It will be
quite
a
honored,
great
and
pleasure.
I do hope we can do that someday. God willing.
Amen. 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 Amen.
All
Thank
right.
you, sir. Thank you for your time and thanks for
Matthew, bhai, please stay here. Don't leave. Okay.
okay. Okay.
All right. So, Dr. Robert, should I remove your channel now as well?
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for coming here once again. It was an honor to have this nice discussion with you, and your book is marvelous. Loved it. Thank you so much, sir.